Hi everyone, I'm Michael Okello, and today's biggest question is why classical music still matters, and its lasting legacy on just music and everything from day to day life nowadays. This presentation itself isn't just like a history lesson; it's about how music from the classical period still echoes in modern life, from the structure of pop music to emotional film scores, and just how composers like Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven really just laid the foundation for everything we listen to now. A brief but necessary overview of the classical period was that it introduced a new musical language, focusing on form, balance, and emotional clarity. The composers of that at that time moved away from, the complex and kind of old style of the Baroque era, favoring simpler forms like the symphony, sonata, and the string quartet. And then orchestras also expanded during this time. So they went from smaller sizes meant to be for the elites to bigger stage like audiences, And just to compare some key elements here, I made a table that simplified, the differences between the two. So for melody itself, the classical melodies were clear, balanced, and just easier to sing, while Baroque melodies were more elaborate and decorated with just trills and fast runs. And then with harmony, classical music just uses simpler and more predictable harmony with clear dominant movement, while the Baroque was just more complex. Um, and then with form, classical composers used structured forms with clear sections and repetition, while Baroque music was either free or very rigid itself. Sorry, very free or very rigid. And then with texture, classical music was mostly homophonic, so one melody with an accompaniment, while Baroque music was polyphonic, so layered with many multiple different independent melodies. And then with expression itself, classical music just showed emotional restraint and elegance, while Baroque music was just dramatic, with very strong contrast and intense emotion. So it was just very, like I said previously, just so rigid. Now, why did this all start? Well, for me, it was in seventh grade middle school. What had happened? It was in seventh grade middle school. What had happened was, so I had gotten in trouble that year. My mom just needed something for me to, be in school and stay a little bit longer while she kind of figured things out and then come pick me up later. And so I discovered our band needed some guy for the orchestra, and I joined in playing the viola because I was just a pretty, average height kid, but a little bit on the taller side. So it was just something bigger for me to hold rather than a smaller violin. And what we used to play all the time was, Mozart pieces and Beethoven pieces, and I was just starstruck kind of with how emotional their music felt, despite how very structured it was. And then I watched this movie Sinners recently. It just came out with Michael B. Jordan. It's kind of the new craze or whatnot, where there was a string quartet kind of playing in the background during this one particular scene. And I just realized it sounded like something from the 18th century, and the connection just pushed me towards exploring why this music still works today. Because in my mind, oh, there's a limit to, how much beats you can make and how much songs you can make, but these guys, their music to this day stood the test of time. And I think that's incredible. And I always wondered why, but I never got into the specifics. And that's kind of why I want to introduce you guys here as well. So, now, starting off with the child prodigy himself, Mozart, from a child, he was destined for greatness. With the name Wolfgang Mozart, like ridiculous. He was a genius of melodic writing. His melodies were clear, symmetrical, and just rich emotionally. Take Eine kleine Nachtmusik. I've tried this whole week. I'm still terrible at it, but it's so balanced, and it almost feels like it's telling a story with just phrases alone. It's the kind of emotional clarity that shows up in modern music, and it still sticks today. Whether it's like a Pixar score, or even just a video game from the games we play, it's crazy to see that we've decorated his life from the beginning pretty much as a prodigy to show that it wasn't just a fluke that we called him that he was a great composer. Now, I had to create a little concoction here, but hopefully it works just well. So we're just going to test this out real fast. But here's that recording. You see, notice how the melody, rises and falls even. You hear homophonic texture, so one main melody within the supporting harmony underneath. The use of diatonic harmony makes it sound bright and familiar. The techniques still shape how we build tension and resolution in modern songs. This is where classical music is at its best when it the influences that shine through is just the symmetry in the melody, the predictable structure that like makes it feel almost comforting. Think of how pop songs just use a similar structure in hooks and choruses, kind of like a rise and fall. They give edge and then they let go. Like that's Mozart's legacy at work right there. Now, starting with Haydn, he was the father of symphony, as most would say. With over 100 symphonies, he didn't just write music, he literally invented rules around the music he was creating. He was a revolutionary in his own right. I stumbled upon his symphony, the 104th one, and just wow. It's perfect classical music, no aimless wandering. It's a catchy tune, and it's amazing to show just him himself how he holds your attention. He wasn't a rule follower, he was a rule breaker. Especially in his surprise symphony, he literally jolts you awake with a loud, unexpected chord. It's playful, but it's smart. He's engaging in all of his music. He's left a legacy, a profound legacy, just showcasing how he can pioneer music and be incredible in his own right with the three of those, as his competition back then. But it's amazing to just hear how great of a composer he was. You're just literally the perfect beginner's guide to whoever wants to get into classical music. And just listening to that piece itself, you see how the piece just kicks off with this statement, just a unison statement of the whole orchestra with just immediate energy, almost like a curtain opening with like purpose. This is Hayden saying, like, pay attention. I'm beginning, I'm starting. And then it enters the main theme, which becomes bouncy and folk like, strings dancing away, light and quick, almost like a dance. And it's a simple surface, but it sets the stage into how it begins to unfold, where he starts spinning the tune and passing it around the orchestra, layering textures where you hear strings and wind instruments with dramatic swells. Like in just 30 seconds, you get tension and release. It's just musical storytelling. And don't even get me started with Beethoven. Beethoven himself started off with classical music forms, just basic classical music forms, and then he just exploded them. Like, I'm not saying out of nowhere, but he wanted to explore different kinds of music, just like today, where we have new genres popping up every day, new, forms of music, new beats, new sounds, just something new and creative. These guys were the first to do it. They were the leaders of this, art reform itself. And you see it in his symphonies, like Symphony Number Five, which starts with a basic four-note motive, which he builds from that is monumental. This taught film composers just starting from one small musical idea or like one small theme could carry a deep emotional weight, and he revolutionized just how to how to hear and see music in a different way. Like literally, this guy was blind. I mean, deaf. He was deaf, making music, and it's crazy to like see that. Like I'm not saying like deaf people can't do that, but like I don't know how to make music if I can't hear it. I'm not even a music major myself, but that's ridiculous. And then just one question I really wanted to know is, like what does emotional intensity in music mean to you? Because listen to this. Like, do you hear this music? The famous dun 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 motive. It's not just like catchy, it's structural. Beethoven repeats it and develops it throughout the whole movement. It shows the unity of the piece. It makes it feel like a story. Like modern composers like John Williams do the same thing. Like think of the Star Wars theme. One idea just used in many different ways. It's not just about the notes, it's about transformation. Classical music composers use small motives like building blocks, just like film composers use those reoccurring themes to make us feel rotated in a scene or a character, with a scene or a character. And that's incredible. Like, I don't want to underplay their, time itself, but in a place where information takes decades to get from one place to another, like it's incredible to see how it's just these three resounding composers can come up with such amazing pieces of art. First, the genres. First, the genres. The symphony and the single quartet showed us how musical ideas could evolve over time, almost like characters in a story. Haydn and Mozart mastered this dialogue. Opera evolving too, thanks to Gluck's reforms. Opera became more emotional and direct. Then Mozart added humor to the singspiel and the magic flute. Then came around sonatas, which gave soloists just the spotlight in music itself, especially where like Beethoven's piano works, where you can hear the full emotional journeys in just one instrument. And then with styles themselves, classical melodies were just clear, catchy, and balanced. You had the Ein Klein Notch music, stuck in your head, and it was no accident. The texture was mostly homophonic, so a clear melody supported by harmony, unlike, the busy layers of Baroque music where it was just kind of just one singular deep tone um, of music. Then the structure or the sonata form feels just like an argument. You get a theme, a twist, and then just a return. And don't forget the surprise that Haydn, famously played for us. It was playful jumps that caught audiences off guard, while Mozart just used the subtle shifts to keep things elegant and fresh. Even in pop music now, we follow classical music patterns. Verse, chorus, verse is basically just like the trinary form. Unity and variety are everywhere, from beat changes in rap and tempo shifts in EDM. These classical ideas help us stay emotionally connected to music, even if we don't realize it. The classical era broke down these barriers. Broke down these barriers. Haydn and Mozart wrote for public concert, not just palaces. This was art's first democrat democratization. I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up the words here, but turning symphonies into shared experiences. Like today's TikToks, Beethoven remixes have been streaming through playlists, continuing that revolution when music just moved from elite courts to crowded halls. It created something radical, the idea that great art belongs to everybody. And it's crazy now, like I'm hearing it every day. It's in my own rap lyrics, not myself, but like the music I listen to, I can hear Beethoven symphonies. At the start of the song, it's a catchy vibe, or it's just in the background. It's the idea that art belongs to everyone. That emotional connection, whether it's from 1791 or 2025, it's what makes music truly just universal. Each of those giants, each of those giants just changed music forever. Mozart brought elegance to melody, Haydn gave it structure and clever forms, and Beethoven just revolutionized music with just a raw emotion and drama. But now it's your turn. Who do you think changed the way we hear music the most? And most importantly, why? Like, let's take a vote and hear for yourself, in the comments when you do watch this video, if you do, what specifically between each of these three would you choose that impacts the music you listen to today? In conclusion, for me, I used to think classical music was just old, but now I realize it's everywhere. In the video games I play, to the music I listen to. And understanding it just helps us break down why music makes us feel things, the raw emotion it brings out of us. Because this shows how the composers guide us through emotions like a storyteller. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful way of array of notes compiled to convey meaning to our thoughts in every emotional sense. And even when we don't feel emotion, like, music is captivating in that way. Every catchy hook, every moment that gives you goosebumps, there's classical DNA at work. These composers just gave us the toolkit for all of it. That's why it's not dead. It's a foundation of what and everything we hear today. It created the blueprint and taught us everything. Thank you. Have a great one.